All right, well, welcome to another episode of The Conscious Endeavor. We're here to talk about the self, reality, and all the good stuff, all the conscious, good content here. So be sure to subscribe, hit that like button if you like our episodes, keep updated to what we're doing. So today we're just going to be tapping in. I think we're talking a little bit about personality, identity, the idea of celebrity, all these kinds of things. Really it's interesting how personality comes online, especially, the psychological sense that I'm kind of tapped into. Where does it come from? How do we, I think, elaborate on how we're conditioned, how our thoughts come to be, where they come from, where they originate from. A lot of times those things, tend to be the sources of media we're, accessible to. So all of those things are definitely influencing our kind of self-narratives, the way we talk to ourselves, all those sorts of things, so.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that I'm still like learning about, and I've raised my consciousness a bit to where I'm learning to reflect on myself and look at programming, because programming is something that occurs. It happens throughout. We've highlighted this in all of our episodes. We talk about it through our family, through our culture, through music, through just life experiences. Everything in a way is being curated until you take some time and energy and just go within. And even when you go within, and there's layers to it. And, I got to a point where maybe I felt a little too, I don't want to say the word cocky, but where I felt, arrogance maybe a bit. I got to a point where I felt like, all right, cool, I'm conscious now. But then I'm learning now, I'm raising my level of awareness and what consciousness really is. And, it's not meant for me right now in this current state to really just give people guidance. What I can do is just reflect upon experience and just what I know of my current, experience. And as we're talking right now, and what we're hitting on, these thoughts, where they come from, childhood. What is it when you're a child that you look up to or you want to do outside of your family? What are those things that are fed to us on TV, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. You touched on a cool word there that I want to emphasize, just the layers. These like layers of self-perception in a way, because in this essence, there's it is twofold. We do talk about maybe media, the influence of, the things around us. Parental things are really big in psychology, or a lot of Freudian psychology. The early stuff was all about these ideas that are instilled on you really through what we'll call like your first imprinting, which is the parents that you have, the relationships you have. In that very early childhood, which kind of set a precedence for who you do become. So there's that imprinting, but there is, this goes back to a debate many of us are probably familiar with, this nature-nurture debate even. You know what I mean? The sense is like, okay, well, we have all these things we've been susceptible to, but also in essence, we do have a particular expression that we're trying to bring into the world. And I think a big part of like, in a sense, the spiritual practice and getting to your spiritual nature is trying to intrinsically identify with some of those things that what am I before these conditions? Who am I before those?
As you were saying that, I was literally thinking like, when you let go of all that imprinting, when you're able to let it all out, what are you left with? And that's like where I'm, that's where I'm catching myself. Yeah.
Emptying the self.
And when you empty yourself, it's like this observer mode, but I'm not there at this moment, but I know that I'm getting there, and I'm like learning about that. So, I do want to highlight, as we go through these, we have these episodes and we're talking about things, it's really to shed light on the light that we've accumulated and to assist people, with that. These are some beautiful things that we're talking about here. Imprinting from childhood. I want to circle back to that. I used to look up to people like, oh man, I want to be like them. Let's take somebody else, for example. I want to be like Mike. I want to be like Michael Jordan. Now it's like LeBron James. It's like what ends up happening is people see this image of somebody and they believe it's beyond them that to become that, and they start like idolizing. And when you start idolizing, whether it's a musician, what I'm saying, like people are like, oh yeah, man, I can't think of, you could, I'm sure, knock out like name a bunch of like musical people that are like people idolize. At the end of the day, they're human. You know what I'm saying? And they're human just like us. What we have associated with them maybe sometimes is this power, is this, these cars and this jewelry and whatever it is. Right. And it's really wild, is like, they're just like us, but the difference is, I think sometimes when you're driven by your heart, I mean, I'm not judging you, I'm saying like when you're driven by your heart, those things at some point just come to you if it's meant for you to have. And, I just felt like I'm realizing more as an adult now. I don't have that thing. Like when I see someone that's a celebrity, it's like, it's not that fascinating with me.
Yeah,
like,
I think we fall in love with the image of the individual, and a lot of times too, we tend to attribute things that are much more like higher than maybe what that individual actually is, because we're just obsessed with the image. And in a way, it kind of parallels what we're seeing in social media to some extent. Is like everyone's now trying to create this image of themselves, and in a way, it kind of self-reinforces what that person consciously may like where they may want to be. But again, it's just imagery. And as you said, ideology. It's like there's that saying, they say like never meet your heroes, right? There's like that quote, right? Because it's like when you really meet the individual, you realize, well, they're not this just like infallible image. They are actually a human being, and they go through the full range of emotions. They go through these things, and we are constantly striving to uphold a particular image. And we kind of, it becomes material. And it's a lot of times too, is people who reach certain things, especially when it's material driven, they get all those things. And at the end of the day, they're like, well, that's like, I'm still me. Like, where is this inflated sense of self going to take me? You think it's going to take you to these heights, but like you keep gaining all these external things, and the internal world is really what's important to our well-being and our mental health. You know what I mean?
And I see, circling back to the children, when they see this, they're fed on TV. They see someone on TV. Someone might see this one day.
Television.
Television. And it's like, I think it's important for me to find my own vision. But anyone listening, like,
right.
Are you aligned with what your vision is? What is your own vision? What is your vision? And when you really take time to think about it, like some of the things that you believe you want, like, someone's like, I want to have this and that. When they say that, I want to have this and that, then it's like, then you're not even worth, at that point, I believe you might not be worthy of it, because that's why it's not there. You know what I'm saying? So if that's something that's meant for you, maybe it's time to really adjust that vision of yours so that it can bring that to you, because ultimately that's probably not your vision. I mean, once you get that, I'm just gonna say gold chain, because like that was a common thing I saw like growing up in Detroit. I'm like, yo, everyone that I kind of like saw, like, at
that's
least
what they wear, this is what they do.
Yeah, I'm like, to be honest, man, I don't want to. Let me not even bring that in, but I don't want that energy. Like what that draws in, what that brings in. I don't want. It's a bit much for me now. But being a child, when you see these things, it's like, yeah, I want to be just like them, and it's almost like godly.
Yeah, I mean, as we said too, the idea of these layers, because when you really start to ask deeper questions of like what you want to choose for this life, you have the first layer being these images, these ideals, these things that we kind of set up for ourselves that are in a way false. I mean, they're just things that we strive for. They're things that we believe we want, but they're, again, in spiritual practice, are deeper layers to the self and deeper layers to what we want. A lot of times, maybe if we again take the framing of that nature nurture idea here, is that what we've been nurtured to or conditioned to believe we want is only that first layer of the self. It's because that's the layer of the self, I think, that's a reflection. It's a reflection of what is. So we see the culture, and then we think to ourselves, trying to find maybe a sense of self-validation. We say, okay, what should I become in order to find myself of value to the culture that exists, right?
Wow. Let that sit.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's that being like the first layer of like, okay, well, this is what I think I should be. And I feel like I come to that in writing music even, where it's like, I see a lot of musicians who write from the perspective of like, well, what do I think other people want to hear? What do I think what does the audience want? I want to play this stuff that the audience wants to hear, because that's what's going to get me the most praise, right? But again, in terms of layers, there's deeper paths in that. And I think diving into your own personal spiritual practice and saying, let me get rid of these things, let me empty myself, right? Where do I now find myself? Where is my point of direction when it comes to that,
How did you get to that point?
Oof.
You know what I'm saying? Like that's the part where I'm like, as much as I keep saying I'm at that point, I battle with it daily. You know, like not daily, like
Everybody
but
does.
it's like
Yeah.
it's, every day it's like I feel like we're offered choices. You're gonna make that choice, the lower vibrational choices, the emptiness, or you're gonna know that you have everything you need.
Right. And an interesting parallel too is like that it's almost like when you realize you're nothing, you can see everything. And it's kind of a parallel, and depending on the language you want to use, because like certain practices will try to minimize the self so that you have no essence, because if you have no essence, then all of a sudden what you really are is present now. You know what I mean? Minus all of these kinds of conditions. But diving into, I mean, as you said, it's an everyday struggle, I think, for everybody to kind of find their place in the world, and it's something you need to constantly like recommit to. That every choice you're making is really, you know, as small as it is, you know what I mean? It's going to set a different kind of momentum in yourself. You know what I mean? In modern culture, for example, like we're all clinging to our Starbucks and our little things. And these are uppers. Like, you know what I mean? Like caffeine at the end of the day is a drug. And it's something that keeps our mood partially elevated. So we hit these things, and even the sugar in it, you know, it's a little dopamine hit. So now all of a sudden it's like, well, you know, your mood is going up and down, but then, you know, I got Starbucks today. It's, ooh, well, okay, cool. You know what I mean? Or someone said something to me and now it's down right now. Well, you know, I think this, or then another event happens, and it's interesting how much of our mood and our sense of self becomes so dependent on these external conditions. And learning that intrinsic identification is such a huge practice, I think, you know? I mean, how did you kind of pull away? Because you're also saying here with like the sense of what you saw and what you were striving for, but you changed paths pretty hard.
Yeah, you know, there's a lot of, I don't want to say trial and error, but there are some things that, you know, I see that we put poisons in our body all the time, right? Whether it's sugar, like these GMO things, maybe alcohol, you know what I'm saying? These are things that at its root, like I actually learned with alcohol, it actually means, the actual name alcohol is like eat spirit. It's actually eat spirit.
Wow, get out of here.
Yeah, I looked at someone posted this the other day. I was like, yo, actually that's what it literally means.
And that's why Arabic.
Yeah. Or Aramaic or Arabic. Akul, I think they, you know, all languages come from like, you know, more ancient languages. So I believe it might have been Aramaic, but I know the Arabic word of it. It sounds just exactly like that. And what they utilize it for, the reason why it's utilized to clean utensils is it kills
bacteria, kills things, literally.
Yeah, and when you look at the translation, what it does is when you take it and you put it into your body, it actually eats your soul, your spirit, your soul.
Well, it's interesting too, because like every time you see a liquor store, it says like wine and spirits.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like we literally, even in our language, even in the English language, people refer to alcohol as spirits.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's like an extreme parallel there.
It's out in the open. You know what I'm saying? It's not like
it's right in front of your face,
you know,
right? Just, hidden in blind sight, or what is that saying? You know, hidden in plain sight.
And that's why it's also like, you know, taking time, like you're talking about, to really just center yourself. I mean, you know, and that's something that, as you're saying that's something for me to even practice, you know, because like it's something that requires effort. It requires your intention to be that. Because like if you don't have intention for that, what I would imagine happens is you get consumed by all the vices or the whatever lower vibrational things might be there, because it's all around us.
Yeah.
You know, you're constantly being stimulated with things. And like, it's like, even if you don't want to watch TV, or, you know, let's say you watch YouTube, you're going to be hit on YouTube. There are ads that come up in these things, but at least, you know, we have something here that we're creating that, you know, if people hear it, I hope they get to feel our energy and what we're experiencing. And you asked me how I got to this point. Like literally, the universe, my world had to like turn upside down for me to really wake up to some things, and that's not anything I wish on anybody.
Right. Well, the thing is like sometimes the bottom, you know, they say rock bottom. It's the bottom layer of the self. You know what I mean? Maybe when you see the failings of you constantly trying to externally identify, or just anyone, right? Externally identifying, we find that like, oh well, you know, if the conditions aren't perfect, if they aren't met, all of a sudden now I have a loss of value in myself, right? And then in that sense, right, we need to understand how to intrinsically identify regardless of the cult of productivity and capitalism and personality and these imagery, idolatry, like all these, things we're trying to touch on, it's interesting because, people will turn to vices, like as we're talking about alcohol, like things like that, people will turn to it again as a mood elevator or as something that they're clinging to kind of, as a coping mechanism. Right. I mean, you always make jokes about happy hour. It's like, where it's like, you get out of work and maybe you had a hard day and now you're like, well, I need a drink. Right. And this mechanism, this immediate bounce back. It's like, well, if I do that, then I'll feel better. Right. It's kind of like this charade.
And it's like embedded in culture. Right. Like my thing is
and advertising.
Dude, we have so many things. Yeah. I mean, I'm with you on that too. Advertising, not just, it's in everything. It's in everything. Even you'll see every day, like you might even see like the people who give you the news, like, all right, well, it's time to have one. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, all right, I'm gonna take your poison right
Tip your bartenders, everybody.
Yeah, like, here we go. Like, it's happy hour. It's 4th of July. You know what I'm saying? It's
right.
It's literally like when you gather with people, instead of like having some sort of, and listen, I'm not saying knocking anybody who does it, but for me, where I'm at right now, it's just me saying like I don't want to put any more poisons in my body.
Yeah, I mean it's the truth though too that like it's really the social interaction that gives us the energy. I mean sometimes some people drink just because they're like, oh, it takes the edge off. It makes social interaction easier for some people.
Oh, dates. Oh yeah, like you know what I'm saying. Maybe we can meet and have a little wine, and I'm like, it's perfect. It's a perfect thing. Yeah, let's lower your vibration a little bit. Let the get in that mug. Let me stop.
The interesting thing is if we talk about some of the science of this stuff is that the alcohol, like in heavy amounts, will literally shut off your frontal lobe. 100% will literally shut it down. So a lot of times the whole job of your frontal lobe in your brain is to be this acting inhibitory, like an active inhibition, because naturally, our animal mind is always like, well, fight this person, and it's really just like aggression, root animal things, hunger, thirst, but even like sexual behavior, deviance, things like that are naturally animal impulses. Our frontal lobe, our job is to basically assess the situation, assess your social environment. The civilized self really comes from this inhibition of saying, no, don't do that. You shouldn't do this way. Right. And you want to find an avenue to kind of maybe somewhat fulfill those desires that you naturally have, but you need to find the appropriate avenue. So the frontal lobe is mainly online doing that. And alcohol will shut that down. Immediately. So that's why we end up jumping on that table. We do punch that person in the face. You know what I mean?
Wow. So what takes over then though? Let's say like when you...
Well, the thing is so if you don't have that inhibition coming in, right, from the frontal lobe, you're basically disinhibited, which means like you can't stop yourself essentially because you don't have that system of checks and balances. The frontal lobe is kind of doing that cost benefit analysis and understanding consequence in civilized society, behaviors, things like that. But when that goes offline, you're basically more towards your animalistic self. And we can say a direct parallel to the idea of you're saying lower vibration, like these are lower brain states or like lower anatomically brain areas, that are dealing with that.
Wow. I mean, that's a lot to digest in the sense that, like, I'm having like flashbacks. Like, it makes sense. It makes sense why, when people make connections with others while they're inhibited, or if that's the right word, right? Like, and the next day it's something else. It's like, well, back to reality, like back to your reality, back to you thinking right, and here I am. Like, I don't want to tell people what to do, but it just sounds very like the opposite of productive. Like it's like you and I think there's a lot of societies waking up to that as well. But one thing they were talking about during COVID is like alcohol sales were still through the roof.
I think they went up.
Yeah, they went up.
You know what I mean? Like, in New Jersey, there's an opioid crisis. You know what I mean? A lot of people are turning again to these vices because
every state.
Yeah, really. Yeah, no, seriously. And a lot of times we turn to that because we're lost in ourselves. We're lost in our... Because I think to me, a healthy psychology is a person who lives with purpose and pursues a purpose. There's a quote, I don't remember directly where it comes from, but it's like an ancient like Greek general or something. And he says, or he might have been a king, something like that. But the point is, he says, without vision, men will perish.
Wow.
You know, so, and the point is that you have to have something to push yourself towards, because driving towards something keeps you really from, first of all, stagnating and also falling backwards. Right.
That is like, wow, without vision though. I mean, like, and to think, which brings us back to what we were talking about, idolatry. You know, I mean, not idolatry, just what people, you know, just look up to or look as a goal or something to achieve. It's almost like when you see these people that we look up to or we were idolizing, whatever, you know, we've all gone through it, collapse.
Right.
Collapse due to whatever. And, you know, it's no judgment. It's just a reminder that we're all human, and like, you know, we all should look for our own vision. You know, and even now as I'm sitting here talking to you, I'm just thinking about, I'm like, I really want to focus in on my vision. You know,
again,
like,
even looking back to what we said before, like television. You know, television is the seed of a lot of these advertisings and a lot of these things that are infiltrating our culture, unconsciously influencing our minds. And that has only sped up with the social media generation, because now we sit there and we just get fed information like thing after thing. And then there's algorithms that are improving every single time you use the app. And some of us, you know, we might open that app 10 times in a day. And every time you view it, it's getting better and better and better and better at keeping your attention and showing you what you want to see. And it's crazy too how quickly the algorithm will change. I've done this with my own Instagram, where it's like sometimes I'll look at certain things, like I'll start watching animal things, you know what I mean? And all of a sudden now the algorithm's like more, you know, National Geographic or cat videos for some of us, right? It'll change so quickly, but then all of a sudden, go on your feed, like even try this experiment right now. You can go on your feed and you can click something that is, you know, what I try to do is I click something that's conscious minded. I find quotes, I find different things, and then I'll start just scrolling down that, start liking a couple of those things. And then the next time you come back, there'll be 2 or 3 of them instead of just 1. And then you go to the one of those again. Next time it'll be 5 out of the 10, you know what I mean? And all of a sudden now, if you do it a couple of times, you'll notice your entire feed will be filled with that thing. You know what I mean? So it's really important, I think, to be mindful about how we use those technologies and be mindful of what it really is doing for our, you know, mindset and
that's important.
Feeding those cycles.
I didn't know you could turn the messaging off, right? I didn't realize.
Oh, really?
I was hanging out with somebody.
No way.
I was hanging with somebody. He's like, he, my phone kept going off. He's like, you know, you can turn that off. And it's like, I never thought about it, but I realized that's how much time and energy I was giving to it. So it's the point, like, you know, am I working for social media? You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And an interesting thing that you're saying right now about these algorithms. So, you know, they also, I guess, make assessments of people.
100%.
So, like, you know, I met quite a few people on some of these trips. Next thing I know, I go to the search bar as I'm getting someone's Instagram. I'm like, oh, yeah, I had an Instagram. I look at it, it's just a bunch of booties. It's like, you know what I'm saying? It's just along that content. I'm like, I'm not searching for any of that. But then I put it together. I'm like, okay. So what the algorithm ended up doing is like, it looked at these people I just connected with. I looked at what they were like, you know.
I have noticed too that like when I start talking to a person, especially through the app, we start getting similar content. And I'll get that person's content.
Wow.
It's really funny, especially some of us who just like share memes. It's a big way. I think it's a love language nowadays at this point. But if you send someone something, they'll be like, I just saw that. You know what I mean? And a lot of times your algorithms will cross over. And yeah, they do. I mean, Facebook, for example, which now owns Instagram, Facebook, and WhatsApp. Yeah. A conglomerate of, you know, data and information gathering on humans. But if you go to your, like, you know, old school, you go on your desktop and you go to your Facebook, you can actually, in your settings, it literally gives you a political ideation. It'll tell you what your political affiliation is based on the content that you consume. So they know things about you. They know a lot about you. They may know more about your rhythms and your patterns of personality than you do.
Than you're conscious of. And that's really, it
scary.
goes to, there's somebody who once said that, like, it's like they can read, they already know what you're thinking and stuff like that. And that's why, like, at this point where I'm at about all that is like, as long as I'm centered and aligned with what I'm doing, I won't have to question it. Like, hey, you know what? You know, like, there's nothing hidden in this world, is the way I see it. And it's like, it's just important for you to do what you would do no matter what. You know what I'm saying? And if it's like speaking up against something, or if it's, speaking up against something is one of the biggest things. Like I was just listening to something about in China, this guy couldn't board a flight because the algorithm had determined his tweets were not like his tweets would making him a threat.
Wow.
His tweets were making him a threat.
Interesting.
And he could not board a plane.
It's interesting, too, to think that those systems are connected. Because at this point, good old 2023, Elon Musk has bought Twitter. So essentially, it's a private organization now. They are still gathering this information. I mean, they're obviously not, paralleled with Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, whatever we want to call that metaverse organization. But now if that's a private industry and they're gathering and they hold this information about yourself, it's interesting. I mean, our face at this point, we're easily identified. A lot of people open their phones with their face.
Oh, I mean, that stuff's already,
I mean, so they do have that information readily available. And now, especially if you're opening your phone with that, if your phone is now also connected to your social apps, all of that information is aggregated and put into this thing under the idea that we're making you safer, right? By identifying people who are threats. But, there's always, potentially things that can be, against maybe a particular narrative, right? I mean, we are in the country of free speech. You know what I mean? Those things are really important to just democracy and our ability to exchange ideas, and also for innovation to occur. You know what I mean? For innovation to happen, we really need to be, actively conversing about what are the issues we have and how do we fix those issues. You know what I mean?
Where we're at right now in this communication that we're having, it's ultimately talking about what we're seeing and experiencing. And it's important to have this dialogue. And it's not about being anti something. It's just something that might cause discomfort for people, because at what cost? Last I checked, the reason why, we went over to these other places were to prevent these things from happening.
It's just interesting, too. I mean, kind of circling back to how these companies really are aggregating information about the self, about these how we externally identify with particular things. Again, these are things that are patterns to some degree, but again, we can radically change ourselves. I think part of the spiritual practice, again, is a disidentifying with this externalization that occurs, due to the world. I mean, and in a way, the world is our mirror. Right. So, I mean, as we mirror the self, what we seem to seek, what we look for, to some degree is finding us, right? Because our minds are focused and are very good at particularly identifying very specific things. So if you're looking for the color blue, right, I can easily look around this room and find something blue very quickly, right? But now if I'm thinking fear, or if I'm thinking love, I can very quickly, unconsciously, my brain will identify fear. And it will find it, and it'll move towards it unconsciously. It'll find, or I can find love, and I can unconsciously move towards people who are in harmony with that. So it kind of echoes this idea of this spiritual practice where people say, like, what you're looking for is looking for you, right? But it is a lot, there is science to this, and it really is about like how we, a good way to say it is like our mental framing. What is our mental frame? Because if you look at the frame, right, if you change the frame, you'll change the picture. Right? You know what I mean? So again, this idea that the world is a mirror, right? And we kind of find those things naturally by living and being and breathing and thinking and doing.
Wow, man. I just felt like I just went on a journey with like a guru, right? You know what I'm saying? Like, where, that's another story. But it's a reflection of us. And I think it's important for us to observe these things that, like you just spoke of, how AI knows us better than we know ourselves. So maybe, if we could take that energy that we're putting into AI, if we put that into ourselves, who knows what will happen. You might find some magical stuff.
Yeah, I definitely think that in a sense, this constant use of technology is pulling us, definitely our attention away from ourselves. Because I mean, if we sit in meditation, you have the intrinsic practice, you get, all of a sudden you're like, wow, my stomach hurts. Like I had no idea. Like, wow, I actually have a pain in my back. Like, oh my God. And then you can stretch and move and adjust that, right? But the thing is too, and there's been studies actually done on this, which is super weird. There's a study done on people who were like just scrolling social media, and they were just like gathering just various data about the body as people were doing this and engaging in these behaviors. There's something your body does when you're sitting and you're relaxing and you're reading a book or you're doing whatever and you're in like everyday activity. You naturally will go every so often. There's a deep inhale that occurs every so often while you're just like, when you adjust to a different thing, right? Naturally. But what actually happens is that breath impulse is suppressed when people were using these technologies. So you think about how much of our attention is being pulled away from ourselves that we're literally not even doing things that our body and our biology naturally does, because our attention is that far pulled away from ourselves, you know? So it's like, you know, when you sit in meditation too, like you do these body scans, you literally bring your attention and your awareness into your body. You know, you want to do that, and you can move, and controlling your attention becomes a skill. You know, that's a skill that you can develop. But when you're constantly on these platforms, your sense of self is being diffused into, what is that person doing? What is this person doing? All of a sudden, your self-narrative becomes kind of corrupted, because now you don't have a central point. You're seeing, oh, this person's doing that, and this person's doing this, and this person, and your mind is now on like what everyone else is doing. Right, rather than being like, what is my? I mean, you know.
Yeah, no, that's wild, because I've actually just had that experience recently where we're doing yoga on this beach. It's already so majestic, but you know, there's a gentleman that just started doing this crazy move. I don't know what it's called, but it's like, I'm sure you could do it. You're probably like, he's on his hands and his feet just fully extended, like, you know, with his stomach towards the sky.
Right, bridge.
Right, bridge, like a real bridge, right, like. As he was doing it, the guy next to him was like, show off, and then he tried it himself, and he was able to do more than he thought he could do. And there's a benefit of, you know, when the collective in that in those scenarios, it is about focusing on self. But I also think, like, if someone's around you, or if there's something that's occurring, it's meant to be some sort of information that's utilized. Don't get me wrong, I went to a yoga class one time where everyone there, I felt like, oh my God, they're like superstars. Like, I saw, like, how do you even do that? Then somehow, some way, I surprised myself with some of the things I could do at that time. It was just really magical.
Yeah, especially when you're tuning in, man. When you really tune into yourself, you can do more than you can. Especially, I mean, the whole idea of growth in and of itself is that you can do more and be more and become more. So, I mean, even in the interesting thing, like a little bit, again, just tapping into some science here, it takes 30 seconds for a muscle to release when you stretch it. So initially, you have a certain, like if you tried to touch your toes right now, you'd get to a certain length. Even in 15 seconds, you know, if you hold that posture, you're going to get farther. 30 seconds, the muscle has now released from that tension that was there. Because the whole point of the muscular system is to adapt to the conditions, right? So it's like, you know, by the end of a yoga class, you're 10 times, I don't know, but 10 times, but you're much more limber than when you went in. You know, so the whole process is like having a growth mindset. They talk about this in psychology, a fixed mindset versus a growth mindset, and saying, okay, well, you know, if you have fixed mindset, which is a lot of what the science was back in the day, you know, you have a certain amount of genetics and that's what you become and blah, blah, blah. But then we realized that epigenetics, genetic expression can change. The brain can change, like neuroplasticity. A lot of these current sciences now actually show how modulatable the self is. And now with the coming, like our generation in this sense is now kind of tuning into this idea that, you know, we can change ourselves. Because when you have that fixed mindset, you're very much locked into, this is what I am and I can't be anything more. You know, you get away from that idea of growth, you know, and I think that's really important to always echo that you are capable of change. You know what I mean?
That is really vital for us to all understand, because you've seen it in society in so many different layers. You know, I think India has a caste system where, you know, if you're born into this, all you can do is handle dead bodies. You know, there's this system there, and you know, I don't even know how to explain, like, how do you even, and they're taught and told that you cannot come out of this.
Right. And
society at some point starts doing that. You know what I'm saying? Like over here, you know, they talk about, oh, you can do this, like when you're a child, like, oh, hey, you grow up, you can be a policeman, you can be a fire guy. I mean, they're all vital things for society that we do need, but it's programming us too in a way. It's like limiting beliefs. Like,
well, it's also the limited amount of choices that we may have. What we think is available to us. Again, there's a thing in psychology called the availability heuristic, and it basically says that when we try to think about something, what's immediately available in our minds tends to kind of bias our thinking to think that's what it is, right? Like, for example, if I can't think of many people who are cops, this is a random example because you said police, I'd be like, well, like, nobody cops. I know, I don't know. Well,
you said cops.
Weird example, but like, in the sense that, like, if I can't think about those many things, or for example, if I say, well, nobody thinks that way, and I only say that because I don't know anyone who personally identifies with that, so I would say, well, nobody does that, right? Immediately our psychology naturally goes into this like affirmative of like, well, that's not what it is, right? And it's assumption. We're acting on assumption a lot of the time.
Yeah,
which is crazy.
There are people that like, hey, I want to clean up my neighborhood. You know what I'm saying? There's that's a real feeling. People have that. Sometimes we discredit because of our own bias. It's important to not have judgment. You know what I'm saying? Like now, I'm like, there might have been a time in my life where I'm like, oh, if so and so does this, so and so does that. I kind of like had a judgment about them. Now I'm like, you know what? Change is real, and people can be in these spots, in these positions with the greatest of intentions. Like I met somebody who, it's that celebrity type of thing. I looked at him like he's a, human rights type of person. But then also I saw like, like there's things that just because, he's standing up for something doesn't mean he's fully aware. And we're never, I don't feel fully aware either, but it was interesting seeing that real time that I'm having a conversation with him about something that tapped into something with spirituality, but it wasn't something that he's like, oh, I haven't read it or looked into it. And that was fascinating to me because when I looked at him, I'm like, wow, here's a guy who's standing up for these things that we would call, injustices going on across the world. But he's not like, when I talked to him, he didn't even like understand the concept of like spirit, like, and that was fascinating to me. And that's why I'm like idolatry and, celebrities. It's a bit of a myth. We're all human beings and, whatever drives us is the key. Our vision is the key. And one more thing I just want to circle back to is how we, yoga, you mentioned yoga, you're in your own energy. A lot of people, I didn't like yoga because I'm like, oh, it's very intimate. I don't like it. I don't want someone next to me, whatever. Actually, it's just me, my own energy and my own fear to go within because the ego at that time did not want me to go into my, higher self.
I think that it's interesting too, because like how we become aversive or avoidant of certain things because there are, again, as we're talking about, these layers of yourself or certain aspects of yourself that are afraid to go there or don't want, the egos kind of hold on, these aspects of ourselves. I find that with music even too. Like, for example, I find, because like when I was younger, for example, I was big on like metal. So I was such a metalhead when I was younger. And I was like, metal is the only music. It's the only thing. Everything else sucks. So I was kind of like on that wave for a long time. But also after a while, I got older and I started to realize, well, certain types of music were just, because music brings out so much emotion, right? So if you listen to a song that makes you feel vulnerable as an individual, if you can't let go, if you can't feel that vulnerability in yourself, you will not like that music. So a lot of times there's this reflection of like, what you want to see in yourself, and we use music as an emphasizer. Like when you want to turn up, for example, right? You'll put on music that brings you there,
I got some theme
right?
Songs,
So also, and in the converse, it's like you sometimes people, who don't want to. And when I was growing up too, it was like music that was soft. It was like, well, that's gay. I don't like that. That's, whatever.
Oh, shoot.
You know what I mean? And that was like, that was like, but that was a thing, like, in the 90s, early 2000s, whatever. People were, aversive to this because they were afraid to tap into those sides of themselves. And even in that regard, it's like if a man is afraid of his own femininity, to be vulnerable and to have this idea of like, I can also be vulnerable. I can also have emotions. Like I can be sad sometimes and it doesn't make me weak, right? There's a lot of these things and these conditions, that pop up for us.
Bro, you just nailed it so much, man. Like it's like why, and this is why it's always an individual thing. I know I speak like generally, but I'm really just talking about my own experience. It's like why I didn't really touch music and art and all these things is because like I felt like that was like, you know, feminine. I don't want to do that. I don't want to do these things. Like, all right, I'm gonna try to play basketball, and I'm just gonna make jokes. I'm saying that's what guys do. Like in general, it's like we're so afraid of tapping into something because it is foreign to us, and then we label it so that we avoid it. And the wild part is a lot of these people who avoid some of these things. I know you used a word, you know, like it's like who designs the clothes that these people wear? They're trying to be so masculine. You know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying? It's made by what we might classify as someone who is not aligned with the masculinity. You know, and it's just the way the universe works.
Yeah.
It feeds the ego, though. You know what I'm saying? It feeds the ego. Like, yo, I'm gonna wear this. Anyway, yeah.
I mean, it becomes ways again of representing the self in a way that the ego or the person wants to, the image that they think they want to become, you know, and in a way too, being aversive towards exploring other aspects of yourself, you know, becomes self-limiting. You know, if you don't dive into vulnerability, you might be, you know, a very rude person your entire life because you're actually pushing pain down to the surface. And how you treat yourself by pushing away pain and responding to pain with machismo and aggression, you know what I mean? Now, all of a sudden, you may treat your partner in that way. So then when your partner tries to bring you into a space, or someone, or your parent or whoever tries to bring you into a space that's vulnerable so that you can get to the root of an issue, you may now throw that aggression on them because that's how you deal with it in yourself, right? It becomes this kind of, again, how it's a mirror, you know what I mean? A lot of times, how we speak to ourselves ends up being how we handle other people. And it's funny too, because when I was younger and trying to get really good at music, I used to be very, very militant on myself about like, do it again. You know what I mean? Play the scale. Like you got to do it perfect. You know, and it's very like perfectionist and militant and aggressive towards myself. And then I found myself doing that to other people. So then when I wanted to help other people, I would be like, do it again, blah, blah, blah. You know what I mean? Because it was the way that I did it for me. So how I approached it and how I spoke to myself ended up becoming internalized. And then I projected that onto other people, you know, and having that self-awareness is a big, you know,
there's layers to that too, right? Like, you know, parenting, that's why it's so important too. It's like, where do we get, I'm not saying you get it from your parents. I'm saying like, you know, there are some things that are passed on from that. And sometimes it's like, all right, well, we're a part of a system already. We believe that this is the way life is supposed to be. Right. This is what you're supposed to do. This is what success is. This is what, you know, and gratitude to all of the ancestors and everyone before us and everyone now, you know what I'm saying? I do truly appreciate and have gratitude for everything that, you know, was bestowed upon us. You know what I'm saying? But, there is cultural norms that were passed on. There was like family structure that was passed on. I think family is very important. I think it's essential for many of us. And sometimes, you know, it comes with its, what we might say is like negatives, but it's important to really honor that. Like, what are you learning? What are you picking up? And that's why it's important, like regardless of whatever your circumstances, whatever's going on around you, whatever you're picking up, to have some sort of practice where you can center yourself and ask yourself, like, you know, what is your own truth in this? What is your own truth? Why are you, like, why is this around me? What is the purpose of it? And what do I really want to do? What do I really want to say? What do I really want to share? And yeah, I mean, there's layers to it. As I'm like listening to you talk, it's like triggering me in so many memories, thinking about art. Art is life. Art is life.
Life is art.
Yeah. I avoided it for so long. Like I was just like, oh man, like don't want to see it, don't want to do it. I just want to do sports, maybe lift weights and all that stuff.
Yeah, there's an art form to lifting weights, for example. Yeah. You know what I mean? It's an art at the end of the day.
That's how amazing humans are, that we can literally transmute anything and make it beautiful. And like, you know what I'm saying? Dumbbells. You know what I'm saying? Like, listen, that's why, like, to be honest, I'm excited.
Yeah.
As I'm a student of life, I'm excited to incorporate new things. I think calisthenics is something that's really exciting when I see that. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, working with your own body weight, especially even, you know, yoga, and also like why, for example, your leg bones are so much denser than your arm bones is because they're just holding weight all the time. The more you compress the bone, literally the bigger and denser it gets. So like literally just a repetition of just putting weight over your head and having it there is literally already creating the compression that's bringing, energy and all these things to the body. So I do want to circle back a little bit too, because you did mention the ancestors, the elders. I mean, as we talk about these layers of self-identification and where we come from, I think it is really, really important to always honor your elders and to know, what their struggles were. Because again, it's like, if we don't know where we came from, how do we necessarily know where we're going? Right. So in that regard, if we don't know, how things are unfolding, especially like what the struggles of our ancestors have been, how do we then, go forward? What are we going to bring into this world? What was, in a way I think about like trajectory, like if it's like, if we continue the line, I mean, maybe that's the path of least resistance to some extent, you know what I mean? If we can, continue down that line, but it's like, we have to know where these things have been occurring, what's been happening, and how we can move forward,
Honor the ancestors, learn the lessons from them. And there's some that I still am processing as we're sitting here. Like you're reminding me of that. Cause like, it's one thing to give thanks, but also to understand what they went through. It's information, and sometimes information, I don't mean in a negative way. Everything's information, but there's a reason why it was there. There's a reason why they went through that. And it's important to process it for ourselves as well. Because like, think about all the energy that we give into information that does not have anything to do with us. Like we go outside that. The family is the closest thing we have to vital information that is like, part of figuring out why we're here.
Yeah, that's a huge question, right? If we say why we, and we're talking the royal we, right? In terms of like this species, like knowing where we came from, knowing where we are going is just a huge question that I don't even know if we can ask. And I think if we asked any person out there, they'd all have a different answer to that question. So it's interesting, how we individually identify with those things as we, navigate this world.
And this is something that like I feel like we'll probably tap in more on the on our next show, but it leads to like why we're here. It's important to understand why we're here, and I think the easiest way to figure that out is to go inside and listen to yourself.
Yeah.
And then you'll know, because like you're not always a city. Like I know Warren's Detroit hat. I love Detroit. I'm not Detroit. It is something that lent me energy.
You are from
Detroit.
Yeah. This means know where you're going, right?
Yeah, exactly. and I think it's important we can tackle this on, I don't want to say tackle it because it's fun, just sharing our...
Tackling's fun.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, tackling is fun too, you know what I'm saying? But you are so right. Here I am doing that one thing, like watching what I'm saying because I'm like worried about how someone might take it. Yeah, we're about to tackle this mug. We're about to go deep into it with our hearts and say what we really want and about what we've experienced and what we're seeing in our current awareness of what life is. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. What community is, why we're here, and we're all here as individuals, and I know people talk about the collective, but it's hard to focus out. If we focus on the collective, essentially we're not focusing on ourselves. And I think when you focus on yourself, it'll lead you to where you want to be, where you should be, and where you need to be. Also
like finding our niche, how we can serve the collective by knowing ourselves, right? We got to know how we can serve. And the only way we can do that is really by knowing ourselves in a way. But yeah, I think we'll definitely hit that next episode. So thank you guys for tuning in. The Conscious Endeavor, hit that subscribe button, hit that like button. If you want to support us, check out our links in the description, and we'll see you guys on the next episode.
Gratitude. Ciao.
Peace.